So, September is NICU Awareness Month, and I was going to come on and share our story because the little guy here did finally make an appearance, but he did have to spend some time in the NICU. And I have recently been made aware that his birth month is actually NICU Awareness Month. It's September. And for anybody that doesn't know or isn't familiar with the NICU, it's the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. It's a separate intensive care unit specifically for newborn infants. And a lot of people seem to think that it's all preemie babies, but he was actually early term. He was born at 37 weeks, which is not full term, but it's far from premature. He had to go to the NICU, and a lot of, full term and beyond babies go to the NICU. I met a woman in WIC the other day, and she had a baby at 41 weeks gestation, or it might have been 41, 42, and he was in the NICU. He had jaundice and had to be under, the bright UV lights and everything, and a little bit here, didn't have bad enough jaundice. He had a little, but not. He actually went to the NICU for a pneumothorax, which is air in the chest cavity that's outside the lungs, and also his lungs, I don't know if it was from the pneumothorax or what. It was a crazy, I didn't even think to ask. It was a crazy time, but also his lungs were not absorbing oxygen or getting rid of carbon dioxide like they were supposed to, and so his gas exchange was reversed. He had high carbon dioxide in his body, and he also had the pneumothorax. And what happened was, when he was born, everything was pretty normal except that he didn't cry. He had a little whine, and that was it, and I didn't think much of it because it was crazy and hectic, and I was in the hospital by myself, and I had to call one of my husband's friends home from work to watch my other kids, and it was just crazy. So I just thought that maybe he was a quiet baby and wasn't going to cry much, and which he doesn't cry much. He's a good baby. But then the nurses left and allowed us to have skin on skin and breastfeed and everything, and he started grunting. Not like normal cute little baby grunts like he's doing now, but like heavy, thick grunting with every breath. And I still was just out of it and wasn't thinking about it, and thought that maybe he had a little gas in his tummy or something, needed to burp. And it was a while before the nurses come back in because there was an emergency C-section. When they finished that up, they come in to do his weight and his height and, the checks that they do, clean him up a little bit and get him ready to go to the recovery wing with me. And I knew something was wrong as soon as the nurses started whispering. Nurses whispering is never good. And so they was talking to each other, and then they called the neonatologist, and they tried to sound, nonchalant about it, and they were like, hey, yeah, the new baby's here if you want to come check him out. And I thought that was a little weird that they would have to page the doctor, but it was when he didn't come quickly and they called him again that I was absolutely sure that it was something. And they come in and all stood in a circle around him and started doing stuff, and I couldn't see what was going on, and I couldn't hear what they were saying. And then the doctor turned around and said, he's not breathing well on his own. We have done an oxygen mask and 10 minutes on a CPAP machine, and he's still not recovering well. And we're taking him to the NICU. And that terrified me. They said that they thought that it was just fluid in the lungs, which happens with newborns. It's just a thing. And then they got him back there, and he had to be on the CPAP for 2 days, in the NICU for 4 days, and they actually discharged me beforehand, before he was released, so he had to spend a night in the hospital by himself. And it's terrible and horrible, and it's not something I would wish on anybody, but the NICU nurses and doctors were wonderful, and they were always willing to put up with me and answer my questions and make me feel better, and they were wonderful. I can't even begin to say how wonderful they were. Thankfully, miraculously, his pneumothorax and gas exchange were, fixed themselves overnight. By the next day, it was just weaning him off of the CPAP. Sorry, my phone's being ridiculous. But anyway, like I was saying, if you're not familiar, the CPAP machine is it's what people that snore use. It's like an oxygen mask, except it's got the tubes that go up your nose, and it's like oxygen. Well, I mean, it is oxygen, but it's pressurized, so like it forces itself into your lungs and forces your lungs to open, because his lungs weren't opening by themselves. And so he was on the CPAP for 2 days. Like I said, the next morning, everything just seemed to resolve itself. And so he only had to be in the NICU for 4 days. And most of that was weaning him off the CPAP, weaning him off, the oxygen levels. Because when they first put the CPAP in, they were at 60% oxygen, which is super high. And they weaned him down to 20% oxygen, which is room air. Because the air that we breathe in is not pure oxygen, it's mostly nitrogen and stuff like that. It's only 20% oxygen that we breathe in, and so they weaned him down to 20% oxygen, and then weaned the pressure on the CPAP down until they could take it out, and then they weaned him off the IV fluids and onto milk, because he was being fed his nutrition through an IV that was placed in his umbilical cord. And thankfully, very, very thankfully, our NICU stay was short, and our doctors were amazing. I don't even know, and it's really scary to think about, because I almost didn't deliver here. I almost delivered where my mom lives, and there's not a NICU there, and I don't even want to think about what would have happened had he been delayed long enough to get sent to a different hospital just to see a NICU. It's terrifying. But, sorry. So, that's our NICU story, and, just raising awareness, because the NICU is not something that we think about. It's not something that's in the everyday life. I only know 2 other women who have even had kids in the NICU. It's not something that we deal with. It's not something that we talk about, and definitely not something that we ever want to experience. But it's there, and the mothers need support, and the nurses need thanks, and the doctors, I couldn't do it. I couldn't have the life of somebody so little and innocent in my hands. I could not. So, if you feel moved to do something for your NICU, donate preemie clothes, because a lot of parents, they buy newborn sizes, and then if they have a premature infant, they don't have any clothes. So donate premature clothes, donate pens. Nurses always need pens and coffee. Or just write a thank you letter to the doctors and nurses. Just say thanks for everything. Because they more than do their job. They also become counselors and friends to the mothers. Because it's scary and it's not a normal hospital stay.